friends, welcome to the family, this beautiful soprano uke from Ancestor's ukuleles in Japan. In this video, I'm going to talk about why I had this instrument made, why I had it made by Ancestors, and the build process from start to finish, from choosing the woods to shipping it to my doorstep, and finally, my impressions of the instrument. Spoiler alert, I love this uke. Those of you that are familiar with me know that I'm not much of a collector of instruments. I mostly play my Wunderkammer or soprano, and if I want something different, I have my steel string electric soprano from Ways Instruments in Italy. But over the past couple years, I've been on the search for a soprano that sounded great with low G, because you see, I've really fallen in love with the work of Ohta San, and for a lot of his career, he was playing a Martin 3M with a low G on it. All of the production instruments I've tried just didn't quite do it for me. So I knew it was time to do what I usually do, which is find a luthier to custom make me the instrument of my dreams. But it wasn't a job for any of the luthiers I've worked for before, because the sound in my head wasn't quite that vintage sound that you hear from me so much. I wanted something more modern, but with a take on Martin. And there's a lot of instrument makers in the world that do their versions of Martin-style sopranos. It's probably one of the most popular styles of uke. But I chose Ancestors in Japan, and let's talk about why that is. A couple of years ago, I was scrolling on Instagram looking at ukes, as we all do, and I ran across this store in Japan called Quiet Village Music that had this Martin-style uke that I just found absolutely beautiful by this company called Ancestors. And the more digging that I did, I found that Ancestors was just one person in Japan in a small workshop hand making all of these ukes to spec. Each and every one was different. And while they were based on Martin, it was to me as if Martin had kept evolving over the years and improving on their instruments, because the sound was just crystal clear, but still had that nice growl of a Martin. So I thought to myself, one day I'm going to send this guy an email. So eventually I did. And before we talk about ordering the instrument, I'm going to let Hajime introduce himself to you.
Hello, my name is Hajime, and I'm an ukulele maker. I make ukuleles by myself in Gifu Prefecture, Japan. I slowly make 3 or 4 ukuleles per month. I receive orders from many people both in Japan and overseas. I often use softwood for the top, but also often make all mahogany models and solid Hawaiian core. I want to make good ukuleles that many people will be happy with.
I'm not going to lie, it's a bit intimidating to look at a website that's written in a language that you do not speak, even with Google Translate, and consider ordering your dream instrument. But luckily, Ancestors has made it pretty streamlined. There's just a page on his site with a drop-down menu for every option that you could ever need. So I sat there one night and I started filling out the form with what I thought would be my dream instrument. I chose a 12-fret, 345mm soprano, standard Martin scale, as we would always have, and you'll see that that's not what I have. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, wood choice is something that I honestly know nothing about. I've played mahogany ukes that are bright. I've played ones that are super dark. I've played spruce that is dark, even though it should be bright. So no matter how much you read, take it all with a grain of salt. But this all comes down to I don't trust myself with wood choice. So what I did is I selected what I thought made sense based on the descriptions, which was Jindai cedar with rosewood back and sides on the instrument. And I put in the comments, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing. Here's some videos of me playing. Here's the sound that I'm going for. Maybe you can recommend something better. And after I submitted the form, I got an email back the next day from Hajime. And he was really sweet in his correspondence, letting me know that I had probably chosen not the best woods for what I was looking for. He recommended that I went with red cedar instead of the Jindai cedar, which cedar's cedar to me, right? But I guess not. And talked me into Honduran mahogany back and sides, which would give it a warmer tone, still with that projection that I wanted. And I will say he was probably absolutely right on that. But this comes down to, even though I know ukes and instruments really well, I'm not an expert in building instruments at all. I'm going to put my faith and my trust in the person that is building the instrument. And there is a little bit of that whenever you're doing a custom instrument. You need to have faith in the person that is making it for you and trust that they know what they are doing. Now for the rest of the uke, it was actually fairly simple. The head plate here, the ornament, and the pickguard, we'll talk about that in a moment, are all ebony, as well as the binding on here. Very simple, my usual inlay that I have on all of my ukes. The pickguard, I absolutely love. It's actually an integrated pickguard. It's built in. It doesn't jut out at all. But I had it made of ebony because ebony is a very hard wood, and you'll notice on that all of my other ukes, I'm starting to wear through the top of them in exactly that location, and I'm hoping that this ebony stops me from doing that. So with that, I put in the order for the uke. Hajime told me that it would be about 9 to 10 months before he would start building it. This was back in January. He said I should have it towards the end of the year. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, which I don't think we talk about enough with custom instruments, which is the price. So it depends a lot on what wood you choose, what fancy options you want on the instrument. You can pay not very much for a custom instrument. Ancestor's ukes, you can get a basic 12 fret soprano, the base model, with the conversion rate currently in US dollars for under $800 for a handmade custom instrument, which I think is incredible. I went kind of all out on this one. So this cost about $1,500 when I finally sent the money over. But a couple things you want to keep in mind if you're ordering from halfway around the world. Shipping, which was included in this case in that price. But also think about import tax. I'm an American living in the UK. I do have to pay VAT on anything that I bring into the country. So I had to cut a check to the UK government for about $350 for the luxury of bringing this beautiful instrument into there. And I budgeted for that ahead of time, but it's something you want to think about when you are ordering an instrument. Always think about shipping and tax, because these are additional things that aren't really negotiable. Shipping costs what it costs, and the tax man will get paid. So with that out of the way, let's talk about building this instrument. Back in August, I received an email out of the blue from Hajime letting me know that he had a build slot open a little bit earlier in the year and could actually finish my uke and have it to me by October, which I thought was absolutely wonderful. And in a couple weeks, he was starting to send me photo updates. And it's really nice when an instrument builder involves you in the process like that and lets you see step by step what's really going on along the way, as opposed to order an instrument, receive an instrument. And it has to be said, he's a very good photographer, so it certainly does his instruments justice. He showed me the wood that he had picked out for every piece of the instrument, but then the next week I received another email. And he said that the cedar top he had chosen for it had pretty dense fibers in it, and he thought it would be best if we extended the scale length so that instead of 345 millimeters, there's 360 millimeters and 14 frets to the body instead of 12. This is still a soprano instrument. That's still below concert scale, but longer than the standard Martin size. And I liked the idea for sound because longer string length for a low G means more tension. That is a very good thing. But what worried me, and one of the reasons that I love 12 fret to the body sopranos, is that I handhold all of my instruments. Balance matters a lot, because if I'm fighting a headstock like this, doesn't matter how good the instrument is, it's unplayable to me. And I'm sorry, I'm not going to ever use a strap. That's just my decision in life. So I emailed him back and let him know about my concerns. And he assured me that balance would not be an issue even with the longer scale. So I said, go ahead. From there on out, he just kept sending me photo updates and keeping me in the loop with what was going on. We had a slight change on the color of the binding. There's actually a little orange strip in here. We were originally going to do white, but when he put it on there and mocked it up, he sent me a few different colors and said, what do you think looks best? And yeah, the orange really helps the ebony pop out around the edge. Things that don't really matter in an instrument, but when you're paying for a nice instrument, aesthetics kind of do matter, don't they? So it took about a month for the uke to be finished, and then it was shipped over to me here in the UK, which luckily only took about 4 days. That's one of the most nerve-wracking parts of having an instrument, is when you put it in possession of a shipping company. But it arrived here. I let it sit for a day before I opened it to acclimate to this new temperature. And then I opened it and played it. Before I tell you my final thoughts on the instrument, I want to talk about strings, because whenever I get a new instrument, it's always that new search for the right set of strings. And many of you probably know that I have my own strings, the Magic Ukulele strings, which I developed specifically for my Wunderkammer, and it's what all Wunderkammers ship with now, because it solved the problem of the tension on the C string, which tended to be a bit thuddy on that slightly shorter scale. So you might say, why don't you just put your own strings on? Well, they're made for that instrument. This is a longer scale instrument. It's also low G. So of course I did try them on there. Now Ancestor ship with their own strings, which are clear fluorocarbon. I find them pretty close to the Worth clears. I like them, but they're not quite my cup of tea. Although the A string on that set sounds absolutely phenomenal. It just sings, and I need to get a few more of them to put on here in the next couple of years. But I did what I always do, which is hit up my friends at the Southern Ukulele store and order a bunch of strings. So over the first couple weeks of playing this instrument, I was swapping strings every couple days and also recording them so I could remember what they sounded like. So I tried Aquila Reds, the Lavas, the Sugars, the Diodario Titaniums, Worth Browns, my own Magic Ukulele strings, and nearly anything else you can think of. But I ended up settling on Living Waters soprano strings on the C, E, and A. Very basic fluorocarbon made here in the UK. They really suit this instrument well. For the low G, I knew that I wanted a wound string, which many of you probably don't. Lots of people prefer a fluorocarbon. It is better balanced, but I want that sound of Ohta San. And also playing on a soprano with low G, fluorocarbon can get really floppy on there. They just tend to sound very thuddy. They're very thick strings. I don't like them at all. So there's only a couple options out there. You can use classical guitar D strings, but most of them are round wound and have a lot of finger noise, especially compared to fluorocarbon, which is very smooth. So this is the Uke Logic Gold Alloy Smooth Wound G. I tried this and a Tomastic string that's a similar flat wound with a nylon core. The Tomastic was just a little bit mellower. I thought this matched up better. I also tried the Aquila Red, both wound and unwound low Gs, because their unwound one is nylon with copper in there, so it's quite a bit smaller than fluorocarbon strings. It was actually pretty good, but it lacked something in the low end that a true wound string really has. So I think this will be my setup, at least for a while, the Uke Logic Gold Alloy on the G and then Living Waters up top, but that may change as I grow to get to know this uke better. Whenever you order an instrument online, and especially when you have something custom made, there's always that trepidation of opening the box and praying that it's not terrible, because really you never know. I wish we could all go to a music store and play 100 different instruments and pick out the best one, but that's simply not possible. And you also have to keep in mind that this uke was made on the other side of the world in a very different climate than I live in. And after it travels thousands of miles to get here, it's going to take some time to acclimate to that new climate. And any instrument that you get is going to take a couple weeks to a month to really get used to where it is with the humidity and the temperature here and settle into its true sound. So I always think that when I get a new instrument, I need to give it a few weeks to open up. So I opened the box and the case with exactly that in mind. I tuned it up and I strummed. And it sounded absolutely beautiful and was, quite frankly, exactly what I wanted. It was that clear, concise sound, but all the way up and down the neck. And that's what really gets me, is on soprano ukes, a lot of times we fight in the upper register. Part of this is because of the shorter scale length. Once we get past the 7th, 8th fret, it doesn't sound so good. But up here, it still really sings all the way up to the high C that I have on that instrument. It is one of the most balanced instruments as far as the tone that I have ever played up and down the neck. It projects well in all of the registers. And speaking of balance, remember I was a bit concerned about the balance because of the longer scale. It's not an issue at all. In fact, this is a very easy instrument to hold. And a lot of that comes down to the Goto planetary tuners on here. They're super, super light, just like friction pegs, so you're not overloading the headstock. And speaking of weight, this is the lightest uke that I have in my collection, although it's not the smallest, which really floored me. I did not expect it to be as light as it is. So all things considered, I am just overjoyed with this instrument, and I think that Hajime at Ancestors is doing such a phenomenal job of building instruments and truly breathing life into his creations out of wood. But you know what really matters? Let's hear some music.